We're now live, Chair.
Thank you. Good morning all, and welcome to the meeting of the CAFM Asset Management Board. And we've got one more officer just joining us. And welcome on this very, very sunny day. I might have to draw the curtains if it gets any sunnier. Let me start with apologies and substitutes nominated for this meeting.
Hi, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Robinson and also Councillor B. Smith, and Councillor Sutherland is substituting for Councillor B. Smith.
Thank you, Kirsty. Okay, members' interest. Members are reminded of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or other interests they've got in any items on this agenda. Are there any interests to be mentioned? Nope, not seeing MD indicate. Thank you. The next item on the agenda, admission of the public, is I have a note in front of me which says the meeting's open to the public for all of the items under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972. However, it's recommended that the public be excluded for the following item of business, and that's item number 11, paragraph 3, financial and business affairs. And we will take that at the end of the meeting and switch off the live feed at that point. Thank you. Okay, minutes of the meeting on the 2nd of November is the next item. Can we agree those as a correct record, those of you who were there? It was Councillor Stephen Lee and Councillor Megan Swift and myself. I'm very happy to propose them as a correct record. Stephen?
Yeah, I am as well.
Right, okay. All right, we'll agree that item. Thank you. And now on to number 5, the regular item in terms of revenue budget monitoring. And I think that's you, Mr. Greenwood.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. The report in front of the board today details the latest CAFM projection for the year. It's the third and final monitor that was reported to Cabinet Chair in February 22, and it details the forecast underspend of 200k for the financial year, which is an improvement on the position on the balance position that was reported to Cabinet in November. As it stands now, Chair, the underspend will go against any potential budget pressures within the regeneration and directorate and help balance the overall budget. The appendix detailed in the report details the various budget headings within the overall service control budget. You can see there, Chair, that there's the staffing budgets and all the budgets that you'd associate with the buildings. There's reference in the report to the savings of £4 million that's required each year to be achieved, that's been agreed over a number of years, and it's CAFM's contribution towards the budget process for the council. The appendix details the savings, the various areas and the savings it's been achieved over the year. Because of the nature of the budgets, Chair, and the number of budgets, we monitor any savings over a number of years, and when it's felt appropriate that the budgets will continue over a number of years, then we reduce the relevant budget and it goes against the £400 million. So in the appendix, it details the saving of 800,000. It's detailed at the bottom of the appendix is being achieved in the current year, but when those savings have been identified over a number of years, they're taken out of the budget, and then we report on a different position. So when we move into the current year, if we're looking at the same report in the current year, there won't be net savings to be achieved of 800,000. We've identified another 600,000 now, so that figure would come down. So I think it's a fair achievement over the years that the CAFM have achieved this 4 million savings. There are some issues, like every area with many areas within the council, Chair, moving forward. The two significant ones that are detailed in the report are energy inflation, and I think anybody who sort of reads the news and sort of aware of what's going on within the council now is aware that the council's been notified by YPO, who purchases energy on behalf of the council and many other councils, of the potential increase in costs of around 118% is the latest estimate, which is I say that very easily, it's quite frightening for everyone, isn't it? And I think the other area, Chair, that moving forward, that again will impact on many areas of the council, is contract price inflation. CAFM deliver quite a few capital and revenue programmes of work, lots of contracts coming up later in the year. I think there's going to be some challenge. We're already being told that contract price inflation is something that's got to impact on work, and I think there'll be decisions have to be made or considered throughout the year, Chair, as to how we deliver existing programmes of work. You know, do we change the programme, or is it reduced to reflect the increases, or do we find more money to stick to the existing programmes of work? So there are challenges moving forward. I think it's another good achievement for the CAFM service in a very difficult climate to achieve a balanced budget and in fact contribute towards budget pressures within the directorate is detailed in the report, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Greenwood. And it's exactly what we as members want to see, really, is a budget that's going in the opposite direction and making a contribution to the overall council finances. That's really, in the current climate, that is really quite an achievement, really. And I pay tribute and give thanks to the officers who've managed to achieve that with very, very careful management. I think you're right, though, to flag up this coming year, we have got a number of challenges. And the first of those, of course, is energy inflation. And thank goodness we've already got underway, and you'll see later on in the papers, a number of projects which will be investor safe because they're about switching sources of power from somewhat old gas boilers, of which we have many, to air and ground heat source pumps and things like that. Thank goodness that we've actually invested in that. And I think the second thing that you say is going to be an issue of concern for this advisory board, and that's the contract management. And I wonder if perhaps officers could make a note for the next meeting to bring forward a report really on, not in minute detail, but on some of the issues around contract management, because you're absolutely right. You see it at the moment in all walks of life in terms of inflation, construction inflation and materials inflation and other costs. And we are going to have to make, I think, some difficult decisions really about what that means for some of our contracts, and just be useful for the board to get a sense of the scale and the challenges of the problem and what as a council we're doing to address those issues. If that can be brought forward for the next meeting. Thank you. Any questions on the financial report or comments? Dan, Councillor Sutherland.
Thank you, Chair. And since I'm a sub and we're looking at this item, I will add that I think that the team here do one of the most difficult but excellent jobs. It's a really politically challenging role because it does cause a lot of issues, but the fact that you've every year been delivering savings for this council is a real testament. I was going to pick up on the same point as you, Chair, about the decarbonisation and the energy costs, and pointing out that we have some excellent schemes in the pipeline. With energy costs going up and likely to continue going up, does this bring other schemes into the sort of realm of viability? Is there an opportunity that over the next year we might see more schemes coming forward for decarbonisation and energy efficiency projects just because the very price of energy is making them a more viable prospect? Is that something that we're likely to see come forward?
Paul or Alan, who wants to take this one?
For me to answer it, Alan? Sorry, Andrew, Chair, if I just start, and then I think Andrew can come in with some detail about kind of current activity. So in direct response through you, Chair, absolutely, this is an area of activity that's kind of grown in recent years. But in actual fact, we've been doing a range of things over a number of years. We put together quite a comprehensive report to a previous meeting, it's probably about 12 months ago now, where we talked about the range of activity that we've introduced. And it really does scale up from the most simple things. And I think there's a phrase that Andrew uses, which is the cheapest kilowatt hour, is the one that you don't use. So the starting point is, let's make sure that we switch things off when we're not using them. And that comes down to, computers, the heating, the lighting, etc. So around the kind of some of the basics, we've introduced a heating and cooling policy that has maximum temperatures in our buildings that we work to and try and operate to. So there's that kind of level of operational working with people to kind of operate in an efficient way. They're up to the kind of the major schemes that you've alluded to, the decarbonisation schemes. We've got the phase 1 schemes are kind of drawing to a close now. So there are 6 schemes across the borough, across a range of buildings, which are due to complete within the next 2 or 3 months or so. And they've gone, touch wood, they've gone very, very successfully, considering this is new technologies. It's new to some of the team. There's been an awful lot of learning and development as part of that process, which has been fantastic for us. And some of our contractors as well, who will need to maintain these new facilities that we've perhaps not had in the past. There's a second phase that's recently been approved, which Andrew will perhaps say a little bit more about, in relation to Todmorden Sports Centre. So again, another major scheme. These things don't come cheap, it has to be said. And in both of those cases, we've levered in significant external funding to make them viable for delivery. The one thing that I would say, and again, it is difficult. Some of the previous work we've done around kind of refit, energy efficiency, we've looked at solar panels, we've looked at different types of heating systems. They have been based on an investor save approach. So some of the earlier things that we've been able to do have delivered reduced costs in our energy bills, which have been able to fund the capital investment up front. For the decarbonisation, it's not quite as simple, because actually some of our energy costs may well increase as a part of the move to a greater reliance on electricity rather than gas to support the heat pump schemes. So that's a little bit more complicated. It's not quite a straight line in terms of investor save, but certainly this is an area of growth. It's an area where we've refocused as a team. An awful lot of learning and development has taken place. Some major schemes that have been delivered, some major schemes that are in process, and future kind of horizon scanning in terms of opportunities. Sorry, I'll pause there and bring Andrew in.
Well, I'm just going to say, if that's all right with the committee, that actually there's really quite a lot on the public sector decarbonisation in the next report, in capital report. So rather than, I know it's an important topic, but rather than have 2 bites, if we could perhaps bring Andrew in on the next item on the agenda. Any further comments on the financials from members? Or shall we move on to the capital, that's the Corporate Estate Capital Investment Programme item, number 6. Councillor Lee, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief question. I think you mentioned a few moments ago construction inflation, and we have been encountering this, as everybody knows. And I wondered if any of the officers have the latest indicators for what that might be expected to be, particularly on major projects such as the leisure centre and so on. What sort of rate is this construction inflation running at, so we can just get a handle on where we might be in a year's time with the projects? Thank you.
I can't really comment on the leisure centre, Chair. I do know it's an issue across the board, and it is something you mentioned there that you'd like a paper at the next meeting, that it's something that we'll be putting together across the council as part of the monitoring process, really. I mean, it has when you have schemes like the leisure centre at 30 million and with lots of other schemes, then contract inflation can have a massive effect on the scheme. I aren't aware of any rates at the minute, but it is something that we're looking at, and we will bring it all together as you've asked for there.
Thank you, Councillor Lee, and certainly it is an anxiety to us all. I think in terms of fixed price contracts and so on, the things that the various parts of the estate that we're trying to do in terms of hedging against some of these price rises, but I think it's a problem across the country, really, and we do need to keep an eye on it and bring back the difficult decisions that are undoubtedly ahead. But you're absolutely right to keep an eye on that. Okay, can we move on then, please, to item 6, Corporate Estate Capital Investment Programme. Now, is that
That's probably me, Chair.
Elaine? Hello
To
there.
begin with, I'm sure Alan will pop in at some point, and I'll bring Andrew in because I've got a little bit for him down about decarb. So, obviously, the report outlines the position of the estate, which has been well documented over a number of years, I think. Although some decisions have been made about closing and not opening buildings, we've got a large number of vacant and void properties, which does cause us some issues because we've still got to inspect those and still keep them up to a minimum insurance standard. So there is quite a lot of work, even though they're not being used. The report outlines in Appendix 1 the works that we've undertaken, I think, since the last report, which when I tried to look back, I think it was probably early 2020, just before we all went into COVID. So it gives an idea of what's been completed during that period, what's currently happening, and that is generally funded from the original 1.25 million, the back end of that, and also additional funding that comes in, which causes me not really to know how much money we have, but we always seem to, we just use it as we receive it. Appendix 2 outlines the works identified. Alan and I did quite a lot of consultation with directorates about what they needed with regard from a service perspective in regard to premises, and that was the subject of a report in January, February. And funding of 2.6 million was allocated as part of the budget setting. But unfortunately, that only funds priority 1 works, which are the ones that are highlighted in red in the report. The funding obviously requested for more money because there's always things to do on property, but unfortunately there is no funding for that. So that is potentially going to lead to further deterioration. And unfortunately, we're going to have to manage the expectations of both the public and members, I think, on what we can and can't do. Appendix 3 is about the decarb. So I was about to say, Andrew and his team have done a really good job at that, but I think you've heard that. If Andrew, you can just pick up where you are with Todd Sports and possibly Vic Theatre, please.
Okay, yeah. So the phase 1 decarb, which was around 3.2 million. But so, like Alan said, the 6 schemes which cover Brighouse, Library, Bankfield Museum, Spring Hall, Halifax Town Hall, Todmorden Market, and Manor Heath are drawn to a close. We should be complete and off-site by the end of May. And they've gone pretty well, I would say. Each of the projects had its issues with asbestos and Northern Power Grid electrical upgrades, which have been, to say the least, quite challenging. But we're on plan to come in on the budget and get the sites all with new heat pumps by the end of May. So it has been a challenging project. I think one of the lessons learned was, I know it doesn't seem a lot of buildings, but managing 6 buildings with all the complexity and everything else is quite challenging. And of course, it's quite challenging managing Salix, the funders, because they require monthly reports. They require if we need additional time. So, and then of course we've had issues, well, not major issues, but we have had some delays on the supply chain. So it's gone pretty well. I would add. So that was decarb 1. Decarb 2 was a much smaller fund than decarb 1, and so we didn't put in for that, but we have put in for decarb 3, and we've got a funding of 1.8 million, which is match funded of 350,000 to take it to 2.15. And it's just focusing on 1 building, which is Todmorden Sports. Todmorden Sports, the main source of energy is a combined heat and power unit, gas-fired combined heat and power unit, which is 21 years old. I think we've done a fantastic job to keep it running all this time, and life expired boilers. So we are out to tender. So the Salix rules on Decarb 3 are much stricter than 1, where we have to, there's certain milestones where we'll get the funding. But we've taken in a couple of other technologies. So we've got air source heat pump, and we've got PV, we're putting PV on the roof, and we're also replacing the sand filters that clean the water for the pools with a new technology called microfiltration. So, and we're also putting a new substation in. We don't have any asbestos issues, obviously, with Todmorden Sports being only 20 years old. So yeah, we've got the money. We've got we're on with the project. One of the milestones is we have to have our 3 tenders out for April the 4th. So we've been pretty busy writing tenders, and they will be issued by April the 4th, which is part of the funding requirement. Moving forward, we expect Decarb 4, and what we do, we had some funding for Decarb 1 from the Energy Accelerator, which was absolutely amazing because it helped us immensely on technical assurance. So we were able to go with the country's leading technical people on ground source heat pumps. That was an amazing fund, so helpful to us. So our sights are all the time on any additional funding that we can get, and we are expecting some more off Energy Accelerator. Decarb 4, well, our sights are clearly focused on Victoria Theatre. Victoria Theatre has life expired boilers and very ancient heating and ventilation system. So we're very much focused on, or we will be very much focused on Decarb 4. Where we expect that, when do we expect it? Maybe June, July this year. I think the government will bring out another fund, and so we need to be on the front foot for that. So I think that's it for Decarb, and I think it's a reasonably positive or a very positive story. So, any questions?
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Elaine. I think the point that you make, Elaine, is an important one, that the money has got to be prioritised for safety first. There's no question that the safety of the public and residents and staff is absolutely crucial, and those buildings are complex and also many of them very special buildings to the people of Calderdale. So safety first. And in some ways, the shopping list of other buildings that we would very much like to bring forward will have to come forward in different ways. And as Andrew says, look for other opportunities. And you'll see in the appendices that we have been quite creative in using other funds as they arise in terms of some of the upgrades that we have been able to do. So thank you for that. I just wanted to say something about Salix. What a marvellous fund it is. My understanding, and Paul, correct me if this is not the case, is that it's interest-free loans to the public sector. And
correct, yeah.
Nodding, which is really fantastically useful in terms of these invest to save type projects. Let me also say that I still think of Todmorden swimming pool as the new swimming pool. Yeah. I can't believe it's 21 years old and that its boilers are coming to the end of its life, really. It's still the new swimming pool to me. And I wonder if perhaps in terms of the next meeting, because this is very much a roundup towards the end of the municipal year, if we could have just some further information about the bidding to Decarb 4 and the Energy Accelerator Fund, because we have done so well and we've delivered so much for that, and it has made a big impact on things like our rising energy bills, really, that it would be very useful to understand where we're going next with the Decarb funding bids, if that's all right, officers.
That's fine, yeah, that's absolutely fine. Councillor
Thank you.
Sully, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Any questions or comments on the capital paper? Councillor Lee, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the comment that you just made about health and safety being of paramount importance. And of course, in the last budget exercise, we were very supportive. We all know that we have to take care of health and safety as a priority. So my question is, that 2.6 million, I think it was, occurred during the last 12 months. I mean, it occurred before then, but it came to a position where health and safety were at risk in the last 12 months. And we've dealt with that as a council and provided 2.6 million funding because it's essential. But I'm just wondering, I mean, we've got a big estate. What's happening now that we know about that could lead to a similar, demand's the wrong word, necessity for another large amount of money to deal with this health and safety aspect? And if there is, I suspect there will be, and if there is, should we start to look at this in a different manner, and instead of putting in special amounts at the end of every year for things that are pretty much inevitable, it's the way that buildings cost money with age, rather than having to, in effect, put in place emergency funding to deal with a problem. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And that's a counsel of perfection and wisdom, as always, Stephen. I think that you can probably refer to previous answers, I think, that were given at Cabinet on this item. I think one of the things that gives me confidence and should give this committee confidence is the work that Alan and his team have done really over the last 5 years, particularly in terms of assessing each of the buildings and rating them and seeing exactly, as you say, where the problem areas are. And of course, there are always going to be some unknowns in terms of time, and buildings are not entirely predictable. But I think I'm confident in terms of the assessment of the overall estate, and particularly those used by the public, in terms of understanding the phasing of what we might do. And in an ideal world, we would have had enough money from government to basically, paint everything and restore every single joist and replace every single boiler. But I think actually, I mean, I'll ask Alan to come in a minute, but I think that I certainly feel more confident than I did in terms of the overall understanding of the state of the estate, if you like, in terms of these are the urgent must-do public safety, and this is the work that we're going to be phasing over the next year. These are the things that we are keeping an eye on, that we've made these assessments. These are the weaknesses. And you're right, if there is an emergency which involves public safety, we will have to respond to that. And there's no question about that. But I think given the money, the constraints on the money, then I think this approach in terms of identifying priorities is the only path to go down, because there isn't any more money. Alan, I don't know if you want to just come in there.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try and keep it brief because I can go on about this a little bit. So the number of things that we've already talked about in this meeting, we've talked about in previous meetings. So Mr. Greenwood described the revenue position and the savings target of £4 million out of what was originally a £12 million budget. And then there's a commitment there to borrowing repayments of 900,000. So that's 5 million from 12. So that could be seen as a kind of a budget reduction, less money, then less ability to be proactive and on the front foot, etc., etc. So having said that, my view, and I think the view of the team is, within those savings that we've delivered, there are a combination of things. There's a significant amount which is about we're much clearer about where we are and where we need to be, much more efficient in the way that we contract, much more efficient in the way that we manage works. And from a position, it's actually quite scary. Next year, I'll have been here 10 years. So the service has been in existence for a decade next year, which is, I don't know where that time's gone. But in the early days, it for the team in particular, it was really soul destroying, because we'd got these big savings targets, with these big demands, big expectations, and really difficult to be able to begin to meet those expectations. Today we're not in a perfect world, of course, and we've got all these pressures that we talked about, increasing energy prices, increasing inflation on delivering works. But we're in a much better position now in terms of being cited on the issues. In the report that Elaine's presented today, there's towards the very end of the report, there's a very simple one-page summary of an asset review cycle. And essentially, the idea is, as Councillor Lee has described, we know where we are, we know what the emerging issues are, and it's that age-old position of trying to spot the ambers before they turn red. It's difficult when you're on the back foot and you're clawing back a position. You've got lots of reds to deal with, and the ambers are bubbling up. But it's moving to be more forward-looking, more proactive. In the past, we were in a luxurious position, maybe, I'm told, before I arrived, where there was a £1 million capital allocation automatically every year, and that was the investment to invest into the condition of the estate. Of course, we're not in quite the same position these days, so we have to be far more creative in looking for external opportunities and internal opportunities, how we combine those, creative in the way that we think, and so on. So there will continue to be challenges. There'll be things that crop up inevitably that will need a particular response. But in terms of that oversight, that kind of much more measured approach and holistic approach as well. So the other thing that we do try and do, and it's a bit of a mantra that we've got, which is, if we're going to do a job, we want to try and do it right first time, because A, it's far more rewarding to do the job properly. B, it's far more cost effective in the long term. Cutting corners and botching jobs is only a recipe for disaster. So we do try and gather the resource available to do jobs well and to move on. And there are increasing numbers now of schemes that we've done. We've talked about some of these in recent meetings. Sorry, I'm going, I don't know, but some of these in recent meetings. Elland Library. The first floor of Elland Library, what it was and what it is now, it is just absolute transformation. It's some of what I'm going to say later around the delivery plan. And there are increasing examples of that across the estate. There are still challenges, and there are still some buildings that are really difficult for us. But generally speaking, we are, and we often forget the successes, because of course, what do? We move on to the next challenge, and the success is left behind. And we perhaps don't spend enough time reflecting on the progress that we've made over the last few years. And it is significant, actually, when you point to an increasing number of projects that have been delivered. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else on the capital schemes? It's a very good summary, the report. It is summarised, and so there's nuances and other bits coming in, and other funds coming in, thinking of Town Board and things like that, and the other funds, future high streets funds, that actually will have some interaction with the buildings that are already in the corporate estate. I'm not seeing anybody else, so if we then can note that report, please, and move on to agenda item 7, asset review programme.
This one's me, Chair. Morning all, thank you. So I'll just take you through the report, and then I'll open up for any comments and questions. I've pulled this report together. I think previously we've done it over a couple of different papers, but I've tried to pull it together into one to just give an overall review of the approach. So the asset review programme is the agreed overarching strategic review of the estate. So we've touched on a few elements in the past couple of discussions we've had. First of all, we established phase 1 as a 5-year programme. We're just about to move into year 5 of the programme, and all major work has been completed. So Alan just mentioned Elland Library, for instance, and we've also got West Garth, which is the adult respite care centre that was delivered just over Christmas and into the new year. So for me, I think phase 1 has been the catalyst for the overall programme, setting the approach, and I hope gives confidence of the approach we've taken to reviewing the estate as a good way of doing it for Calderdale. Phase 2 is sort of working towards defining the council's core estate, and the main piece of work that we're doing up front is categorising all assets, almost is levelling out the playing field, if you like, across assets, from a resources, a finance and property perspective, a service perspective, and a locality perspective. And so we've got basically a very general traffic light system for every asset, and it just allows us then to have that base information when we approach particular tricky assets or service reviews, which buildings should be focused on versus others, and that side of things. So phase 2 is really identifying that overall approach for reviewing the estate, which it's sort of moreover helpful when, as we've got services at the moment coming out of COVID, reviewing how they approach their service delivery. We need to make sure that those buildings are set up in the best way possible to support those new ways potentially of how services want to be delivered. And then the workplace office accommodation strategy and the agreed 7-year programme of work, and we're just moving into year 2 of that programme of work. Obviously that just identifies the core office estates, and then moving into localities, touchdown points, locality bases, etc. And that's my doorbell. Apologies. Joys of working from home. And then last but not least, we're currently on with the depot strategy, which is in its infancy, working with services to identify their requirements. So one of the key changes in this area for the organisation at the moment is the consolidation of services into the new green spaces and street scene service. So it's just looking at what the previous services required, which we did as part of the original asset review, and just updating that to reflect how those services are currently delivered. So just to run very quickly through the progress of each phase of work or each stage of work. So phase 1, as I've said, we're in going into year 5 of that programme. I'd love to say very much winding down, but we've got a number of assets still that we're planning to dispose over this next year. And there is some small areas of minor work that we're looking at still doing in Todmorden, at Todmorden Town Hall, Todmorden Library, and a couple more areas of work associated with depots, which we may even link towards new depot strategy, subject to when we can bring forward that strategy for delivery. For phase 2, we're going through the entire estate again, and indeed Steve and I went through on a full day on it last Friday, running through the entire estate, just to make sure we've got the categories right, assets are in the right sort of service areas, reflective of any changes through COVID in the last year or so. And we're also identifying, maybe having a bit of a forward look on upcoming service reviews and any properties of note that we might need to do some initial appraisal work on. So that's where we are with that one. The reason why the status has changed from green to amber is purely because we need to get around all the services to identify whether there's any change in the approach of how those services are being delivered, and any reactive sort of change we need to make in our properties. And that's purely the reason for that status change. The workplace office accommodation strategy, the previous status was amber and it's now green. The reason for that was we brought a paper forward to Cabinet, changing the scope of the programme. So we've identified the need to retain Horton Street, and the purpose of that was to create a consolidated office space for children's and young people's services on the first floor, and to reopen and re-establish a single front door for Halifax Town Centre. We felt that Horton Street was the best property for that. As a result of that, we no longer require the office space at Three Ways, and that releases that space to be part of the strategic review for that locality. So I'm now pleased to say that the overall programme status is now a green indicator, and we're at pace, shall I say, to deliver the work required at Horton Street. In addition to the project at Horton Street, the remaining big pieces of work associated with this programme are associated with Halifax Town Hall, reconfiguration of space there. We're trying our best to pull together the feasibility and knock-on reconfiguration requirements to make that building fully accessible, which will be a good news story. Equally, we've got another project down at Mulcher House, which is where the council's data centre is based. So there's a piece of work to link together with the future decarbonisation work and further investment required around what we have in place at Mulcher House and how we can maybe make that site run more efficiently. Equally, there's scope to install more electric vehicle charging points down on that site. So that piece of work where it's not fully on hold, but we're sort of waiting in anticipation of that decarb for, and how we can maybe link those together. And then, as I say, last but not least, depot strategy. So we're currently working through key stakeholder requirements, not just within the authority, but also with key partners, just to look at what depot facilities are required across the borough. So it's almost identifying the requirements first, then reviewing our existing sites, our existing property, what they provide, how we may link those requirements together, and then we can identify what potential investment requirements there are. Again, linking across all the other areas of work and investment that's previously been discussed in this meeting. We anticipate a draft paper later this year to identify those, that potential initial ask, and to determine possibly how that could be funded. So just in summary and sort of the key activity over the next period, we anticipate the delivery of the Horton Street reconfiguration. We anticipate disposal of Calderdale Mill, which is one of the office spaces that we vacated last year. Also, we intend to initiate the reconfiguration of Halifax Town Hall, so bringing together key stakeholders to determine what the business case is and how we intend to spend the allocated budget. And then equally, we've got the reviews as part of the core estates that are currently underway. And we're going to confirm the depot strategy.
Thank you, Dan. There was a lot in there. A couple of comments from me is in terms of forming the stakeholder groups, and I'll say it before the councillors on the call say it, which is that members, councillors are absolutely key stakeholders in the use of the town hall, and I hope officers will keep that in mind and involve us closely in the future of our marvellous town hall. The other thing was I wanted to just ask you to say a little bit more about why we settled in the end on Horton Street in terms of officer safety and accessibility and things like that. Perhaps if you could respond to that.
That's fine, of course, Chair. I think first of all, just to highlight the town hall, we've currently got a briefing note in progress. It's going to go to CLT, and we're requesting 2 stakeholder groups be formed, one with councillors and key members, and I think we're going to be asking for members to be identified through, I think, group leaders meeting, and then also a stakeholder group for the key services who are involved with the town hall. So we intend to establish those groups as soon as we're ready to provide that information. Just with respect to Horton Street then, so as part of the original office accommodation strategy, we were focusing on 3 ways, and it was a previous base for the services that are in scope. So CYPS services, there was a front door there for undertaking meetings with families, etc. One issue that we determined and pre-COVID was that 3 ways was in disrepair, and there's also there's plenty of other issues associated with 3 ways, as I'm sure we're all aware. So as part of bringing forward the configuration of core office space over the last year, the work at 3 ways was on hold, and we accommodated the needs of CYPS services at Printers Buildings in the interim, given that those services were primarily in the office and many other services haven't been in the office. So we had the capacity at Printers Buildings to provide that function and to provide limited access for family meetings. So we've been managing those meetings as safe and compliant, with respect to COVID, but also with respect to the health and safety and protection of staff when having some fairly tricky meetings at the end of the day. So when we sort of started to look at bringing staff back, initially it was last September. We had to consider, well, how can we cater for the services that we've been providing from Printers Buildings, whilst also bring all of the services back together. So last September, we identified that the space at Horton Street will be the easiest to bring into use more immediately, and with respect to the scope and scale of work that will be required at 3 ways. So we opened up the space at Horton Street, and that is where staff currently, the CYP teams, are currently based now. And further developing that, actually, it was identified that space was more effective and fit for purpose for how the style of service is currently being managed, meeting with those families and all that side of things. But in addition to that, we also identified there's that the front door need in Halifax is more than I think it was originally anticipated. We opened up the front door at 42 Market Street to accommodate the council's homelessness service, and I think that was a result of the Burnt Bridges report. And indeed, also the current view for customer services, Customer First, is that Customer First points will be available across all hub libraries, and Central Library, a point has been opened there where contact by appointment has been available throughout the pandemic, throughout the lockdowns. And if anything, it's identified that a drop-in requirement is required. And the Central Library doesn't really suit drop-in as much. So pulling it all together, we've got a front door requirement from the Children and Young People Services, so one reception there. We've got the homelessness service, and we've got Customer First, and then all the other council services that will still require a level of front door access. So just from an asset planning perspective, actually it's far easier to have one reception, one front door, which we can then signpost and direct to services within a building. And so it's determined that actually Horton Street, previously provided a level of that, and actually we could reconfigure it, the ground floor of Horton Street to provide that in the best way. And I think in a nutshell, that's where we got to with the service need, Chair. Thank you.
And I think staff safety was also an issue in terms of Horton Street being equipped with, panic button and so on. And I think it's a recognition that actually there are always going to be people who need that face-to-face. And actually, we have got a duty and responsibility to them. It's a reducing number, has been a reducing number pre-pandemic because of people's use of telephone and online. But nonetheless, that twin tracking has got to carry on for some time. It's particularly important in relation to homelessness. And we shall see what the next year brings and review that again. Thank you. Any other comments on Dan's report? Councillor Lee, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Fully agree with the comments about Horton Street and the face-to-face service. I think that everybody was in agreement that that was very necessary, and it will be a safe location, I'm sure. Just two questions for Daniel or whoever else might wish to answer them. Are there any plans to repurpose or dispose of the old swimming baths? They weren't mentioned in any of this. And secondly, some time ago, there was a basic assumption being made about people perhaps working from home 3 days a week and coming in for 2 days a week. And I think some of the calculations on the council estate for desks and things were based on that rough assumption that was definitely in use for a little while. Just wondering if that assumption has changed and whether the balance between 2 days, 3 days is moving more towards 2 days off and 3 days in, just so that we can estimate whether the arrangements that are being made for desks for people are still in line with present assumptions about working practices. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Dan, do you want to pick that one up?
I think the swimming pool question, I think
I can.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I can actually respond. It's actually in the papers, Stephen. No decision has been made about the old swimming baths, and of course we've got the mosaic in the swimming baths, which we're keen to preserve if at all possible. We have got some money, and the later papers indicate from the West Yorkshire Combined Authority that allow us to do some investigation in relation to housing on that site, but no decision has been taken about how that site might be used. I remember 2 or 3 years ago, there was discussion about a multi-storey car park. I think people's view of multi-storey car parks has moved on, really, in terms of the climate emergency. But a number of things are being explored, really, in terms of a future for that site, but no decision, no detailed designs or reports available yet, but we do have some money from the West Yorkshire Combined Authority to look at whether housing might be a possibility. I don't think we've got any money to look at whether it should be a multi-storey car park, but it may well be that other possibilities are in the mix, but no information as such yet. In terms of the return to work question, Dan, do you want to pick that one up, please?
Yeah. So Councillor Lee referenced, I think it was the original scope of, how we defined the office accommodation strategy. We worked up a desk ratio, desk to staff ratio, I suppose just to give that initial definition of the scope. Since then, we've been working very closely with at service level and with individuals to identify what the actual needs are. And that forms a model that's become known as the organisational shape. We review that on an annual basis, and we've actually just, I've got a meeting actually on Thursday to finalise this last year's review, ready for the return to work in April. And we also review it if there's any immediate service reviews or any big service changes, so we review it as to account for any needs as and when. And so it's basically down to the services, being mindful of the original allocation and how colleagues now work, and there is an element of choice for individuals, but equally that there is a level of there is an allocation per full-time equivalent within a service across every service, and it's up to those service managers to determine what that is and how that's used.
Thank you, Dan. And of course, we must remember that some parts of the organisation never stopped coming in. Nobody stopped working, but the number of people who didn't stop coming in and actually going out and doing their jobs, like social workers, keeping eyes on children at risk and going into people's homes. Alan, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just 2 or 3 points, just to try. The allocation, or the basis of the allocation that Councillor Lee referred to, and I think Dan and the team have just done an incredible job on this, was a base allocation. Following that, there's been an awful lot of engagement with services to determine specific requirements. So that it actually was a 1:5 ratio was the starting point. So that was an automatic allocation for everybody. It's been built up since then. So there are services. So, for example, the CYP services that we described at Horton Street, I think I'm right in saying, Dan, am I not, that quite a number of the staff who will be accommodated in that building will be in virtually 5 days a week. So there are different needs and different requirements in different services. Of course, the breadth of services that the organisation operates, as we all know, they are very different. They have different requirements. They operate in different ways. And so there was a base allocation, but a far more sophisticated piece of work to determine and to agree requirements that would work for individual services. And as Dan has said, that has been used to determine the overall space allocation for each team. How then that's operated on a daily basis is within teams. It's within their gift. They've got a space allocation. How they then work, who comes in on what days, etc., is for them to operate within that space that's been allocated. The other thing that, again, through foresight, as part of the reconfiguration, is we've also got some technology in place that allows us to monitor hot spots and cold spots. So there might be some parts of the building that are used an awful lot, and where there might be some emerging stresses there that we need to spot and respond to. In other parts of the building, there might be much less use. And so the annual allocation or annual review that Dan's described is also potentially supported by kind of empirical information there that says, do you know what, we've got some spaces here that just aren't being used. Let's try and understand why that is, and whether there's something else that we need to do there, or indeed whether that gives us more space that we can put back into the mix for those areas that are overly used. So it is an ongoing sort of review process. There's the annual review, but as Dan said, I think that we do keep an eye on things in the meantime as well. And if there are things that need to flex and need to change, then we are responsive to those changes as well. So it's not fixed in, or cast in stone in any way. There's much more flexibility there that allows us to evolve and respond to changing requirements as things move forward. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Alan. And it will be a case of monitoring from April onwards, really. So that's interesting that you've also got that technology to see how rooms are being used in those buildings. Thank you. I don't see anybody else indicating on this one. So members happy to note that report and move on to agenda item 8. I think that might be you, Stephen, is it?
It certainly is. Yes, thank you, Councillor Scullion. So yes, so we're the Community Asset Transfer Monitor. So at the last Asset Management Board, it was agreed that we provide regular updates to this board with regard to the monitoring of each of the asset transfers. Since the last meeting, we've done two, we've carried out monitoring on two asset transfers, Todmorden College and North Arran Tennis Courts. A summary of those is provided at Appendix 1 and 2, which I'll go through in a moment. I provided there in the covering report the details of the monitoring that we'll be carrying out over the next few months. In March, we've already had the meeting with Goldfields on the recreation ground and received some information. We're just waiting for further information from them, which we've requested before we can provide the overall monitoring position. The same has happened with regards to London Foot Institute and colleagues in the process of carrying that one out at the moment. So we have a timetable in place for the community asset transfers to be monitored. Just moving on to the summaries that I mentioned in the appendix. Appendix 1 is the overall summary for Todmorden College. Overall is a green rating in terms of the RAG rating. The information that's been provided by the group has been very good. There seem to be there or thereabouts on the majority of areas that we monitor on. The finance colleagues have provided some a basic overview with regards to the finance information that has been provided so far. There's some more detailed information that needs to be looked at in respect of that, but at the present time, the finances look healthy. We obviously have a situation there where the council is providing revenue support for a period of time, as previously agreed at Cabinet. The group itself, in speaking to them in terms of capacity and governance, appears strong. They seem to be very well organised, and we're now coming up to 1 year. Will be on the 31st of March since the group took on the property. So again, we'll be looking at a monitor towards the end of the year, but we will be catching up with them in the next 6 months or so to just check that things are okay with them. The second one, Appendix 2, is the monitoring summary for North Arran Tennis Courts at North Arran Recreation Ground. This overall RAG rating is amber for the time being, and that's mainly because some of the information hasn't been provided. We have chased this information. In fact, actually, I've received some of the information in this morning just before the meeting. So hopefully, the information that is within there will be able to take that from an amber to a green. I think that it's quite an interesting one, this really, because it's obviously at tennis courts where no buildings involved. They have carried out the main aim of the group, which to refurbish the tennis courts with money received from the Lawn Tennis Association and other grant funders. So the main works have been done there, and they appear to be a very well organised club in terms of governance and capacity. It's just trying to get some of the pieces of paper out of them to evidence that certain things have been done. And I have actually had a discussion with the local representative from the Lawn Tennis Association to try to see whether they can assist us in trying to get some of this information as well, which they've said they will try to do. And as I say, hopefully some of the information that we've received through this morning will just deal with some of the items which are currently outstanding. So hopefully that just gives an overview as to where we are with the monitoring, and in particular the two particular ones we've done so far. Thank you, Councillor Scullion.
Thank you, Stephen. And I do actually think this is important in terms of, you know, keeping in touch with asset transfers, which of course were publicly owned buildings and leased to the community on long leases, and run very well. And in some cases, as you say, and I think it does strengthen the sense of place and community and provides them with access to sources of funding that we just couldn't hope to access as a council. Any comments, questions? Dan?
Sorry, Chair, I would have got in sooner. It's to declare an interest. It wasn't mentioned by Steve, but further down the list, Hanson Lane Recreation Ground is held partially. It's part of the leaseholder of Hanson Lane Rec. Him is the charity. So I just wanted to declare that, but it's not been raised, so I see it's a bit further down the line.
Thank you. Kirsty will make a note of that. Thank you, Councillor Sutherland. Any other questions on the asset transfer report? No, I think you got away with it, Stephen. But a good piece of work, and really interesting to see those reports, and really pleased actually that things are going well for Todd Learning College, really, an asset to the town. Okay, can we agree then to note the asset transfer report and move on to item 9 then, land and property asset management strategy. Alan?
Thanks, Chair. As members can see, that the Q3 monitor remains positive. 2 of the 16 actions have been completed and the remainder are all on track, green, so that's good news. Some of those are nearing completion. You've received a series of reports today setting out in more detail how key areas of activity are progressing. So I don't propose to go into any of the activities in detail, but we'll pick up any questions afterwards. You've heard a whole theme, and this comes back to some of what I was saying earlier, you've heard a whole theme throughout this meeting around investment in, adaptation of and transformation of our estate. Our aim as a service is to ensure that we make the estate work for the organisation and that the estate supports delivery of the corporate priorities. We want to ensure that our estate continues to add value to service delivery and that we use our collective resources efficiently and effectively. So as Elaine has described, we've been through quite a detailed piece of work with senior teams across the organisation to try and understand as best we can what their requirements are in terms of service delivery and to help to shape the estate to be able to respond to those requirements. And that's a piece of work that we want to continue to build on and keep that dialogue going, because it's really important that we all see the buildings being there to support the organisation delivery of services and not the other way around. So there've been a few significant developments since the end of Q3, which I'll report on at the next meeting. That's the nature of these things. There is a slight lag. We've talked already about public sector decarbonisation 3 and the fact we've been awarded the cash. At the end of Q3, of course, we didn't know that, so that's not reflected in the report, but we can pick some of those up at the next meeting anyway. Members are asked to note the report, and as I say, I'd be happy to take any questions or comments.
Any questions? Just scanning. Nope. I think you've just been too efficient, Ellen, in terms of, and thank you for doing tables. I love a spreadsheet as much as the next person, but sometimes a table is more readable. In fact, we're a spreadsheet family. My daughter had a spreadsheet for a wedding and a spreadsheet for her hen night, so we're very much a spreadsheet family. But a table in these committee settings is very, very helpful. Thank you for that. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody else. So can we agree to note that report and move on to agenda item 10?
Thanks, Chair.
I think that's you again, Alan.
Yeah, just briefly to say, this is a look ahead provisional work programme for the next municipal year. It's attached for consideration, review and comment. There have been a couple of items I think raised earlier, Chair, that we'll pick up and add into the work
Yes,
programme.
please.
I think actually we'd anticipated the decarb and that's on as an item for the next meeting anyway. So we'll reflect that and we'll review that in response to the points that have been raised already. I'd welcome any feedback both on the proposed rhythm of the meetings. We've suggested kind of timescales when the meetings perhaps ought to take place, but also particularly the suggested items. And if there are any further items that members would wish to see, please let us know and we'll add those into the work programme. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Alan. I don't know what members think. I think the rhythm of about 4 years is right because it fits in with the financial reporting in the quarters, and the financial reporting can often be a proxy for how well things are going or where things are going askew, actually. So fitting in with the quarterly financial report seems to me the right sort of rhythm for these meetings. Any views on that? I'm not seeing any dissent. So if we can establish that, and we've got a couple of extra items, as it were, that we've mentioned in this meeting to come to the next report of things that we want to know about progress on. Is there anything else people feel should be in that forward look for the agenda that we haven't picked up? I think your agendas are pretty comprehensive, Alan. Nope. Okay, thank you for that. And we note that report. And we move on to the final item, which is the exempt